name is Álvaro Fernández-Llamazares, and I am a researcher based at the Helsinki Institute of Sustainability Science. I am an ethnobiologist, and my research explores the contributions of indigenous peoples and local communities to the conservation of biological and cultural diversity. Ethnobiology is the scientific study of the dynamic relations between people and biota and the natural world, and the rest of the natural world, I might say. And it's a very interdisciplinary field that really tries to look at human-nature interrelations, often in place-based context and from the very distant past to the immediate present. It's a very diverse field, but we share that binding interest in really looking at those interactions and trying to understand what do they mean in terms of sustainability, and what can all these knowledge systems and practices offer to address some of our current social ecological problems. Much of my work involves being on the ground, working with indigenous peoples and local communities, working alongside them, documenting and assisting in the documentation of their biocultural heritage according to their needs and priorities. So much of my work is really trying to raise awareness about the immense values of these knowledge systems and practices for local and regional and global sustainability. And I've been working a lot with the Chimane indigenous peoples in the Bolivian Amazon, and with the Dasnach community in northern Kenya. The beauty of ethnobiology, I think, lies in that connection, in really trying to promote awareness and increase appreciation towards these other ways of relating to the natural world, highlighting that there's not only one way of relating to the natural world, there's many of them, and some of them could hold some of the keys to address these issues, I think. And that's the value of our work, I think, which is essentially trying to mediate between all these different knowledge systems and those extremes. For instance, if you think about discussions about conservation and sustainable development, I think that ethnobiology, because of that strategic position at the confluence between different disciplines, because of that position, we can mediate between extremes of anthropocentric approaches or those that are exclusively focused on biodiversity preservation. I think that on-the-ground presence help us to refine and enrich those discussions and bring elements from the ground up. So really trying to, again, connect and build global relevance and highlight that those are not only locally grounded systems, but also manifested at the regional level and globally relevant. There's many examples of ethnobiologists who are trying to do a difference on the ground. There's more and more action-oriented programs in ethnobiology where ethnobiologists are standing on the sidelines and really standing behind their community collaborators in addressing social and environmental injustices. For instance, there's many examples in which ethnobiologists have used their knowledge and their research in litigation processes. So, for instance, in legal disputes around the land claims of indigenous communities, there's ethnobiologists who are bringing their writings and their research to highlight the historical precedents and their ongoing presence of indigenous communities in their ancestral homelands. So those ethnobiological works and that research has been used as a form of legal evidence that attests to that long-term connection with the land and those ties to land that have been passed down from generation to generation. So I think that's a very concrete example in which ethnobiologists are making a difference on the ground, and that's a venue where we can see the power of documenting those relations over time, because they can really highlight and foreground indigenous people's rights and their importance in environmental governance. And that's one way, but there's many others. I think that there's lots of ethnobiologists who are working in different international policy forums, trying to amplify indigenous voices in those discussions. There's more and more discussions about intellectual property rights, the indigenous intellectual property rights, and more ethnobiologists advocating for their protection. Lots of people who are also doing community-based work on the ground, so trying to engage in biocultural conservation efforts. Also hands-on action to document and revitalize indigenous and local knowledge. But I think that what unites all these different ways in which we are trying to make a difference is that we are standing up for the protection and recognition of indigenous peoples and local communities' rights. Ethnobiological research, I think that it's a mission-driven discipline, and that mission is really to address and to prevent the loss of biological and cultural diversity. Those are simultaneous losses that are deeply intertwined, co-evolved, and they are threatened. Both diversities are threatened by the same pressures and drivers. We work with communities that have survived centuries and centuries of colonial oppression. There have been very brutal campaigns to erase indigenous peoples, to deny them their lifeways, and to oppress them in multiple ways. And I think that ethnobiology is an antidote to that. We are really trying to bring into focus the work that these communities are doing, the efforts of those communities in safeguarding their lands, in safeguarding their waters and their ties to land. And I think that that's very, very important, seeing the trends of increasing exploitation of their lands and how the global economy sees those lands as being the last frontiers of resource extraction. And we are trying to highlight that those communities have played very fundamental roles in safeguarding these territories and all the biodiversity they harbor and all the cultural diversity they encompass. And that's some of the work that we do, standing on the front lines of those struggles, trying to bring visibility to those fights and trying to support those ongoing efforts of these communities to really sustain their homelands, their cultures, and their connections to places that are meaningful and important for them. Ethnobiology has a strong colonial legacy, and the origins of the discipline can be traced back to the early 18th and 19th century colonial encounters, which were a key arena for exploration and also extraction of knowledge. And some of the early ethnobiological writings were actually very extractive in essence. Those were avenues through which new medicines and new crops and new commodities were being extracted. It was an avenue for bioprospecting. And I think that as a discipline, we are trying to redress that. So we are trying to move forward. And it's exciting to see how the discipline is moving from a state of self-reflection and guilt to one of action. It's very important to ground our work on relations of trust, on long-lasting and genuine relations of trust with indigenous and local communities. And that's where ethnobiology thrives. Ethnobiology thrives when it's grounded on reciprocity, when it's grounded on meaningful relations. And we are increasingly talking about relational accountability, being accountable to the communities with whom we work. I think that that's a very good basis for weaving research and practice, for really making a difference. There's increasing economic demands on the lands of indigenous peoples, and those come without their free, prior, and informed consent. Indigenous peoples face more and more the pressures of industrial development, of oil development, or of resource extraction in their lands. And it's impossible to look at the relations with those lands without taking into account those. Those are forces that shape those relations nowadays. And colonialism can be so disruptive that it can ramify over centuries, and it can bring legacies of intergenerational trauma. It can bring legacies of that take a toll on people's mental and physical well-being. Those legacies limit people's engagement with their lands and limit the mutually reinforcing aspects of knowing and being in this world. And as ethnobiologists, we cannot afford to look aside. We need to remind ourselves that the knowledge systems and the practices of indigenous peoples play fundamental roles in sustaining and achieving sustainable development goals.